Hello, grade twos! This week we're going to be working on writing fractured fairy tales. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what is a fairy tale, what is a fractured fairy tale, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a story map of a classic fairy tale that you'll choose and the fractured fairy tale that you're going to write. First of all, what is a fairy tale? So a fairy tale is a short story that features fantasy creatures and usually magic. So often there would be animals that can talk, or like a special character who can do magic, like a fairy godmother. So a fairy tale is not a realistic story. It's usually not something that could happen in real life. So the characters in fairy tales are not too many, so usually just a few. So some might be realistic, but there's always at least one character that is magical or uses magic. So it might be royalty, fairies, goblins, gnomes, elves, trolls, witches, dragons, giants, talking animals, mermaids, things like that. So it usually at least one character that has some sort of magic, one character that's not realistic. The setting is where a story takes place. So in a fairy tale, there could be more than one setting, but usually not more than 3. So as you're planning your fairy tale, try to make sure that there's not so many different places where things are happening. So maximum of 3. Many of your stories might just have one spot where the story is taking place. So a few examples of fairy tale settings might be a castle or a forest or a cottage, different places like that, especially places that existed a long time ago when most of these fairy tales were written. Then the problem is in a part of the story where something bad has happened. So there might be an evil character or something terrible that has happened to the main character. So in the 3 Little Pigs, the problem is that the big bad wolf was trying to eat the 3 pigs. In Cinderella, the problem is that Cinderella's evil stepmother and stepsisters would not let her go to the ball to see the prince. And in Little Red Riding Hood, a mean wolf wants to eat Red Riding Hood. And then for every problem, there is a solution. So fairy tales usually end with happily ever after. So that means the problem that happens in the story gets solved by the end. So in the 3 Little Pigs, the 3rd pig built his house out of bricks and he was able to trick the wolf. In Cinderella, Cinderella's fairy godmother helped her go to the ball and fall in love with the prince. In Little Red Riding Hood, a huntsman kills the wolf and saves Red and her grandmother. So some examples of classic fairy tales. We looked at some last week that you might have watched, some of the videos where I read those stories. So they might include 3 Little Pigs, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel, The Princess and the Pea, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Jack and the Beanstalk, Snow White, lots of different stories like that. Now, a lot of these are made into Disney movies, but just be careful when you're planning to choose a fairy tale this week. Make sure it's a fairy tale. So, for example, The Little Mermaid is a fairy tale. That's a Disney movie. But Star Wars is an interesting story, but that one would not be a fairy tale. That one would be science fiction. So just make sure it's a classic fairy tale that you're choosing. So a fractured fairy tale is what you guys will be working on this week. So you will choose a classic fairy tale and then you're going to change it. So it's a story based on a classic fairy tale. So some things the same, but it's going to change the characters or the settings or the point of view. So the character telling the story or the problems or solutions, or sometimes more than one of those things. So you're going to choose a classic fairy tale this week, but change some of those different features in the story. So there are all sorts of fairy tales, and you can see here there are some examples. So there's Little Red Riding Hood, the classic fairy tale, and then Lon Popo is a Chinese version of that fairy tale. We've got Cinderella, which is the classic fairy tale, and then you could write a story like Tony Johnston did called Bigfoot Cinderella. So he took the classic, just like you guys are going to take a classic fairy tale, and then he changed it. So it had some things the same, but a lot of things different. There's the story The 3 Little Pigs, and then Susan Lowell took The 3 Little Pigs and changed it to The 3 Little Javelinas. So you will be doing the same thing when you write your fractured fairy tale this week. So your job is to choose a classic fairy tale, and then I need you to make a story map for the classic fairy tale. So I'll show you that story map in a moment. And then you're going to brainstorm to make a story map for your story with some things the same, but some things changed. So here's the fractured fairy tale story map. You will use one of these. My example here is where I've chosen the classic fairy tale of the Three Little Pigs. That's mine that I've chosen. You could choose the same too. And then I've changed it. So in my story map, the characters have changed to Shark 1, Shark 2, Shark 3, and a clownfish. And the setting, instead of being all the different houses, is the ocean. The problem in my story is that the sharks try to eat the clownfish by luring him out of his coral home. So they're trying to trick him to come out of his home and eat him. And the solution in my new story is that the clownfish outwits the shark and escapes. So just like I've changed some things in the Three Little Pigs, you're going to change some things in the fairy tale that you choose. So you guys can download that story map from our class website, or you could find it, I've put it on Seesaw for you to work on, or even if you just take a piece of paper and write those different parts of the story map on the paper, you can show me the story map for the fairy tale you've chosen. So you get to choose any fairy tale. It might be one of the ones I made a video of for you to watch last week, whether it's Cinderella or Jack and the Beanstalk, or just a favorite classic fairy tale that you like. So maybe Red Riding Hood, or maybe it's Snow White. Any classic fairy tale, and then you're going to show on your side of the story map the things that you're going to change. So maybe you're changing the characters, or the problem, or the solution, or maybe you're changing bits of all of those, all right? And then I can't wait to see your story maps and your plans for your fractured fairy tales. Bye, 2B!